We're going to talk about three types of different comments: class comments, attribute or member comments, and then method comments. And I'll just give you a few examples, and then I'll show you a completed example, and then I'll show you how to generate the documentation. So we're all familiar with the standard block, the C-style block comment. And to make this into a doc comment or a documentation comment, we simply use two asterisks. All right. And any comment in this format, the documentation processor or generator picks it up, processes it into HTML or some other format. Since we're dealing with HTML, we'll just assume HTML. So this is an example of a class comment. So I'll just document my class, a class for storing information about time in military format. Okay. One of the things that you can actually write HTML in these comments, and that gets processed. I'm not going to talk about that so much, but you can learn about that later. That gives you a lot of formatting options for making the comments look, and there are special tags that these processors use. Another thing they do is there is a set of tags. These all start with the @ sign. And I'm not going to, again, this is not designed to be exhaustive. One tag that is useful for documenting a class is the author tag. And so, if you're working on a team, then each author would get their own tag. But in this case, this is my creation. And then you can also include version information. So, version 1.0 and date information and things like this. So that's an example of a class comment. If we go down here, we can also document the public data members, the attributes, and to do that, you simply write a one-line doc comment and say something like the hours. I'm not going to document all of these, but you'll see when we get to the complete example that I have documented them all, and then we'll see how that gets processed into our HTML page. So here, for example, now we can start documenting our methods. We write them exactly in the same format. And we would say something like, explicit constructor sets this time object to something like that. And in the document on Oracle's page, it gives you some style comments. So, for example, you're supposed to use imperative language. You're supposed to refer to this object and things like that. So let's document the explicit constructor. And what this does, now there are a lot of things that are going on here, right? So, and this is something that you need to include in your documentation. First of all, I've got parameters. There is a tag for documenting parameters. What happens if someone passes in values that are out of range? So it'd be nice to document that behavior. So one thing we could say here is we could say that it sets the hours to the specified hours. Well, how about this? Sets the hours in minutes to the specified hours and minutes. And specified hours and minutes is stylistically how we refer to the parameters of the method. So that tells exactly what happens, but now, we would say something like, out of range values do not change default values or something like that. Okay, and I think this is going to be a little different than the comments that I actually wrote in the complete example, but this gives you an idea. And so someone reading this documentation on a web page would have a pretty good idea about, what happens, the behavior of this method. There is a parameter tag. The format of the parameter tag is the tag itself, and then the name of the parameter, and then what it is. And so this is simply, the hours, or the new hours, or the specified hours. And each parameter of the method is documented with a parameter tag. Now these documentation generators do some checking. So they'll make sure that you've documented each parameter. They'll make sure that the names match and things like that. So there is some light syntax checking that goes on. And again, I'm not trying to be illustrative here. And writing good documentation is certainly a skill, and probably not one that I have mastered. Okay, so that's how we document our constructor. It's how we use parameter tags. We could do the same thing here with our inner method. Let me write one for our get method, because we also have a special tag for return. So here I would simply write, returns the hours of this object. Or let me be even more specific, this time object. So again, this is kind of stylistically how we do it. And because this has a return type, we use the return tag, and its format is simply the tag itself and then the description. There is no name of this return, so we would just say the hours or something like that. And I think, when people first see the way that we document code, it looks very redundant. So for example, if I've said in the description that it returns the hours of this time object, why do I have to always say that it also say that it returns the hours? Well, this is just stylistically how we do it, and you have to keep in mind that this information can get processed in a variety of ways. This might end up being displayed on a page where you don't actually see the contents of the return tag. The other thing people will new students will often say is, well, why isn't this enough? Why can't I just look at the declaration of this method and figure all this stuff out? And you can. You absolutely can. And there should be a close match between what you write here and what you're seeing declared. But you also have to keep in mind that you often see this documentation separated from the code. And generally speaking, if you're selling your code to somebody, you're selling them a compiled library, and they're not necessarily seeing your source code. And it's a lot more convenient to go clicking through an HTML document than to go searching through code for method declarations and trying to figure out what they do. So we would document all of these methods. In fact, it takes quite a while. Let me just document my set method. It sets the hours of this time object to the specified hours, which must be in 023. So out of range values do not replace. So an out of range value does not replace the current value. And then I have to document the parameter. So again, if you're reading this, this gives you a pretty good idea. Sure, you know that set hours sets the hours. Conventionally, that's how all these set methods work. But now I'm telling you what the range of the hours must be. And I'm also telling you what happens if someone or you pass in an out of range value, that it doesn't replace the current value. So again, we would keep documenting and document all the methods in the same way. Here is how I documented my class. So this might not be exactly the same. Might not be exactly the same that I wrote before, but it will be similar. So again, this is the doc comment for the class. It tells people what the class is for. Here I have documented the public constants that I've declared in the class, and I've also declared my private data members, or I've documented my private data members. Documentation of the default constructor, the explicit constructor. Here's how I ended up documenting the inner method. So again, I'm telling them what format I'm expecting to extract, what happens if there are problems with the format, nothing happens, and then what happens with out of range values, right? And then here's how I'm using a parameter tag. And again, I'm using the return tag here because of the integer and so on and so forth. So you can see that I've documented each method of my class. Documentation of my set method, documentation of the set minutes method, same thing, tells me the range, what happens when I get something that's out of range. Documentation of my write method. Now I'm documenting my add method. Here my documentation of the equal method, returns true, returns false. Here I've got to have a param tag to document the time object they're passing in for comparison, and I'm using a return tag to document the return value of the method. Same thing for less than. And then I just copied those comments down here for the overloaded operators. Documentation of the less than operator, documentation of the stream insertion, stream extraction operator, and that's it.